Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman who, under the care of her parents, succumbed to medical neglect. You're probably familiar with the story as it made national headlines in 2022. What you may not know is the biological process of necrotizing tissue that eroded Lacey's skin down to the bone. By remaining sedentary on a couch for several years, Lacey developed stage 4 pressure ulcers, commonly known as bed sores. Most people know about bed sores, but don't really understand what they are or how they occur. In this video, I'll explain everything you need to know about pressure ulcers, necrotizing tissue, and what exactly happened to Lacey Fletcher. Welcome to Dark Science. A pressure ulcer is tissue that has been damaged from pressure being placed on it for an extended period of time. They typically develop in areas where the skin is thin and covering a bony prominence. Common sites are the heels, ankles, knees, thighs, tailbone, elbows, shoulder blades, and back of the head. However, about 70% of pressure ulcers occur at the tailbone. This is how pressure ulcers occur. There are very small blood vessels in your skin called capillaries that are the size of a human hair. They supply oxygen and nutrients to the skin and layers of tissue beneath. Being so small, they are easily compressed by putting pressure on the skin. Capillaries that run over bony prominences, like in these areas, are compressed when bone presses against the skin, from sitting or laying down. When bone compresses these capillaries, it cuts off their circulation. When capillaries are obstructed, oxygen cannot be delivered to tissue, causing oxygen deprivation or hypoxia. Simply put, if tissue has no oxygen, it dies. Dying tissue causes inflammation and eventually necrosis. This is the basis for developing a pressure ulcer and results in tissue decay down to the bone. However, this doesn't happen overnight. Pressure ulcers have multiple stages, and will begin at stage 1. In a stage 1 appearance, the skin has a red pigmentation to it that, when pressed, does not temporarily turn white. This is called a non-blanchable erythema, and means tissue beneath the surface is damaged and inflamed from lack of oxygen. But it's not just oxygen deprivation that harms cells. Waste products build up from lack of circulation. Cells produce harmful waste products like urea, lactic acid, and ammonia as a result of metabolism. These waste products are excreted and carried away by the blood, where they are filtered out by the kidneys into the urine. But now that circulation is cut off, they accumulate and damage cells. Stage 1 pressure ulcers can develop as early as 2 hours from putting pressure in the same area. Though tissue is damaged in stage 1, it's very minor and can be resolved by changing positions to reopen circulation. By stage 2, the patient has been in the same position for several hours to days. Continued pressure and buildup of moisture exposes raw skin. The ulcer now resembles a ruptured blister. Moisture builds up from sweat and sometimes bodily excretions if the patient is totally immobile. Moisture causes skin to adhere to fabric such as clothing or bedsheets. When the patient is moved, the skin adhering to the fabric is sheared off, exposing raw skin beneath. Moisture and warmth around the open wound create a conducive environment for bacteria and risk of infection. Once stage 2 occurs, the progression of the pressure ulcer speeds up, and tissue starts to decay. At stage 3, the ulcer looks much different. It no longer resembles a ruptured blister, but rather a crater. It has eroded down to the layer of fat beneath the skin, called the hypodermis. It's extended down this far because the tissue has become necrotic, as the skin on the outer edges starts to rot. Tissue has become necrotic because bacteria have colonized in the wound and released destructive toxins. For example, Staphylococcus aureus is a bacterium often found in pressure ulcer infections. It releases a toxin called hemolysin. Hemolysin attaches to the cell membrane and creates a pore, causing cell contents to leak out and the cell to rupture. When cells rupture, they release enzymes that are supposed to be sequestered as they can damage other cells. Once released, they degrade cell membranes and rupture them open. This creates a domino effect resulting in a chaotic breakdown of tissue known as necrosis. The wound is now self-sustaining and will continue to rot deeper into the body if it's not treated. Due to bacterial infections and rotting tissue, stage 3 pressure ulcers produce a distinct putrid odor. When the ulcer degrades beyond the hypodermis, It's classified as a stage 4 pressure ulcer. This is the final and most severe stage. Tissue has rotted so deep that muscle, tendons, and bone are visible. Due to the depth of the exposed tissue, bacteria can infect bone, known as osteomyelitis. In bone infections, bacteria get into the inner cavity, where there is bone marrow. The bone swells up and compresses its own blood vessels, thereby obstructing its circulation. If bone tissue dies from lack of oxygen or becomes necrotic, it has to be amputated. Bone infections are very dangerous because they can lead to a blood infection, or sepsis. Keep in mind, if someone develops a bed sore, it doesn't mean they will progress to stage 4. If they're being taken care of by being moved consistently, kept dry, and cleaned, pressure ulcers can be avoided. However, if they are neglected, stage 4 is a very real possibility, which leads us to Lacey Fletcher. For those who may not know the full story, Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old autistic woman who battled mental health issues. At 24 years old, she had a mental breakdown and refused to leave the living room of her parents' house. Her parents, Clay and Sheila Fletcher, said she remained on the couch. They claimed she stayed so long that when she had to use the bathroom, she would relieve herself into a towel. They suggested she be committed to a mental health facility, but according to her parents, Lacey refused. For 12 years, she lived as a recluse with her parents. Despite her mental breakdown and reclusiveness, her parents did not seek further medical treatment. They left her to lay on the couch and progressively neglected her by refusing to feed or bathe her. Witnesses said Clay and Sheila complained they did not want to be long-term caregivers when they became parents. Several times they would go on vacation for an extended period of time and leave Lacey at the house by herself. Though Lacey was a recluse for 12 years, the medical examiner believed her rapid decline and late-stage pressure ulcers occurred just a few months before she passed. This indicated her parents totally neglected her in the final months she was alive. Over time, lack of physical activity and nutrients caused her muscles to atrophy, keeping her bound to the couch. She became so atrophied that her legs stiffened into a folded position and could not be moved, even in post-mortem. Being neglected and unable to walk, she urinated and defecated on the couch, causing her to lay in a puddle of her own waste. A hole was eroded into the couch from the constant buildup of waste, and Lacey remaining in the same position for months. Because Lacey could not move, her lower extremities and pelvis sunk into a hole in the couch. When she was covered with a blanket, her lower half was so sunken into the couch, it looked as if she were cut in half. This led to the headline stating Lacey Fletcher had melted into the couch. When police arrived on scene, they described a distinct putrid odor throughout the Fletcher's home. They found Lacey on the couch, deceased, severely emaciated and her body covered in insect bites and feces. Her eyes were wide open and her mouth was agape. Rotting bed sores were found on her legs and buttocks, with bone and tendons fully exposed. Beneath the couch, the wooden floor began to swell and buckle from buildup of urine and feces. Decay of the wooden floor can be seen in this crime scene photo right here. Mouse droppings were found under the couch, and there were signs that mice were chewing on her toes and feet while she was still alive. The medical examiner stated Lacey's body weighed just 96 pounds. She developed stage 4 pressure ulcers on her legs and buttocks, where skin was totally gone, exposing bone. It was determined Lacey had succumbed to severe bone infections and systemic sepsis. What Lacey experienced was not neglect. It was sadistic torture. Clay and Sheila Fletcher were both found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison.